Welcome to our epic ocean, where critical solutions to a planet in peril are brought to the surface. Our epic ocean celebrates all that is epic about the ocean and why it is the planet's most vital resource. And now to our host, Rich Gurman.
Hey everybody, it's Rich and welcome to the show. My guest today is the co-founder of a unique nonprofit organization called Sustainable Surf. He spent the last decade plus working to transform the business and global culture of surfing towards a truly regenerative model. His current goal is creating the highly connected, low-carbon future that the world desperately needs to both survive and thrive. His main focus now, with his team at Sustainable Surf, is to scale their latest program called SeaTrees. This is the first regenerative ocean health-focused platform created to reverse climate change, and we're going to talk a lot about this. At the end of the day, and definitely at the start of the day, he is a father, a husband, an eternally stoked surfer who is deeply grateful for all the ocean gives, especially perfect waves. Michael Stewart, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the intro. I might just add a little bit of context. I'm completely happy with perfectly average waves as well. I don't
awesome.
I don't discriminate.
Okay, good. I like that. You know, you and I have actually never met until right now, and
Yeah.
for some reason, I feel like that even
But
though
I'm
we
doing
haven't met, I feel
photography work.
like
So hey, I do feel like I know something about you and a kinship, a brother of the sea for sure. So
I was just gonna say the same thing. I feel like a kindred soul connection to you, and I really appreciate you being here and sharing what you're about to share with our audience. So I want to start with your love for the ocean and for surfing. Where
yeah,
did that begin, and how did you create this deep connection?
it's kind of created for me. Like a lot of people, I was lucky to have good parents that would drag us to the ocean.
Hmm.
My family, I'm the youngest of three boys, so being a parent now, I know that taking your kids to the beach and letting them run loose and wild is the best way to have some time for yourself. And being given, sort of that freedom, especially three rambunctious boys, yeah, we got to spend a lot of time at the ocean. Wasn't surfing at first; it was everything else, exploring, chasing after birds, building things, finding stuff. But it definitely led to playing in the waves. And I have this one really clear sort of memory. I was in the shore break or something like that. And this is actually back on the East Coast in Virginia Beach. And I remember body surfing and this, that, and the other. And this one really big wave came up and literally just knocked me straight off my feet. And it kind of flipped me around. I didn't really know where I was, which was, it was sort of frightening and also this is sort of amazing. And it was like a ride. And, it was actually a pretty big thing. And it probably wasn't that big, but it basically took me out, dumped me on the shore, I don't know, 50 feet down or something, is when I kind of washed out of it. And I kind of came up and I was just like, that was amazing, whatever that just was, and I want to do it again, right? Kind of hooked at that point.
That reminds me of how I learned to body surf. A friend of mine, it was actually about two beaches from where I live, one beach over, I'm sorry, and it's a pretty big shore break, and I get tossed around like crazy in this wave, and I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was gonna break my neck, and I jump up, and my friend's like cheering, like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
I'm like, wait, that's how that was supposed to be.
You're like, that was fun. But hey, that is, the, transitioning on to okay, well, how does that lead you to, wanting to have a life to help, protect ocean health? And I think it's something really basic is that if you become passionate about something, if you see something as having value that you want to be around, then you want to protect it. And it's really as simple as that. And a lot of the work that I've been doing in both for-profit and nonprofit ventures that I've been involved in, that's kind of at the heart of it, right? It's like, how can we take, this amazing thing, the one global ocean is literally the one thing on the earth that connects everyone on the planet, right? How can we take that and connect people to it, even if they don't live right, by the beach, or they live, a couple states inland? The ocean is still the most powerful thing. It affects everyone on the planet, everything about them, from climate to food to transportation, everything really, right? So it's, how do you instill that love, right, or that interest or that passion, so that when they're asked to think about how they live their lives and how that might impact something like that, you have their attention, and they're like, oh, right, I want that place to be around, for me to enjoy, for my kids to enjoy, my family. It's a shared resource. That is the key thing that everyone who's working in this space is really trying to figure out. How do we make people care about this in a real, authentic way that they can, see themselves in?
I love that, and we'll go deeper into that because I think for me, a lot of my work over the last several years has been just sharing my experiences of what I get to see out in the ocean every day at my board, dolphins and whales, photos and
Right.
videos and whatnot. And I never thought of that as so much like making a difference, but I do believe it's the impetus to want to make a difference because
That's
it's
it.
that
Right.
it's we protect what we love. So if enough people
Right.
see the can fall in love with the ocean, then we will start making changes. And we're hitting at the crux of why I want to have this conversation with you, because not only did you create that passion, but you've turned it into something extremely tangible that we're going to get into. But before we get to that, there's a couple steps I want to cover that'll help me understand you a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit more about surfing. What
Yeah.
lessons has surfing taught you?
Um, Self-reliance, scheduling, being on time, right?
Scheduling.
No, no, really. Hey, I mean, this morning, right? It was okay. The tide is only going to be good between 7:15 and 9:15, right? So, I'm, it's looking into the future. It's forecasting. It's scheduling. It's saying to my wife, is it okay if I don't take our daughter to school? Can you do that? Because time and tide waits for no man, and I want to
Mm.
do this, and I've got to get all these other things done before I end up talking to Rich for the afternoon, right? So, yeah, it's the absolute opposite of sort of a slacker mentality. You really got to be on it. That's what it comes down to, right? And there's so many, life lessons in there. Being prepared, bringing things with you, thinking about the other people that are going to be um, uh, coming along, even out in the surf, especially at more crowded places, right? Like where I was. Uh, well, I can't tell you where I was today, but what I can tell you is that lessons about sharing and compassion and empathy, and how do you share a really limited and extremely valuable resource, which are waves, in a very densely populated urban space, right? What are the group dynamics? How do you show compassion, share compassion? How do you stand up for yourself, even, right? And yeah, and I mean, uh, I think that being a surfer is one of the best um, practices that someone can do for understanding how to live a sustainable, healthy, uh, just, and equitable life. I'm not saying I'm
That's
there yet.
beautiful.
It's always a journey, but yeah, it's a practice as much as yoga or breathing or anything else
Mm.
is, really. So I hope that wasn't
That's
too deep, but that's to me, that's my experience of it anyway.
Well, no, it's not too deep because to have created what you've created in the last 10 plus years, it couldn't be done without that level of depth love and respect for the ocean. So I appreciate you sharing that. So let's get into that transformation of wanting to create a more sustainable way of being. In
Yeah.
2011, you launched Sustainable Surf, which I
Yep.
mentioned at the opening. How did this come about? What was the initial goal of that organization? Give me the lowdown on your humble beginnings, the lofty goals that you've had, and
Sure.
because I would imagine tackling the surf industry to affect change was not an easy task.
No, it's pretty daunting. The basics of this is that I'm based here in San Francisco. Offices now are in Sausalito. We're right on the water, actually. But so my friend Kevin Wilden and I, we both lived right in San Francisco in an area called the Presidio. It's right in the ocean. It's by the Golden Gate Bridge. We were both working in as sustainability professionals, right? So he's a geologist. He was working on climate change issues and programs. I was working at a nonprofit that was really focused on getting people to reduce their carbon impact from their lifestyle. It was doing carbon offset projects, all great work. But we basically thought that the story around why people should be protecting the earth from climate change is one of the big ones, but just sort of in general. And we were kind of shocked that it wasn't a more interesting story. We were also shocked that the ocean wasn't at the center of this story, because when it comes down to it, the ocean is the driver of everything on the planet, right? 70% of the oxygen that we have on the planet comes from the phytoplankton that are in the ocean. Most people think like, oh, the ocean comes from all the plants on land. No, it actually comes from the ocean. The long-term carbon cycle for the for the planet as well, it's in the ocean. That's where 90% of the carbon is actually cycled and stored long-term. You even look at things like directly like climate change. So 90% of the heat that we've generated in the last sort of 100 years from climate change, it's gone into the ocean. It's the only reason that we're not already at a beyond crisis mode. I don't know if you're actually familiar with that cool movie called Chasing Coral, right?
Yes, great movie.
Yeah, great movie, right? There's this cool little section that I actually missed until the last time I saw it, and it speaks directly to how the ocean is the driver of climate. Basically shows that the average temperature on Earth right now is about, I think, 56, 57 degrees Fahrenheit. It would be 122. The average would be 122 degrees Fahrenheit if all the heat already generated by global climate change, by us burning fossil fuels, by us burning billions-year-old plants, it would be unlivable, right? So, and all this is, none of this was being seen or talked about as even being relevant, right? The blue carbon ecosystems that we're focused on now with our SeaTrees program, right? Those weren't even seen as being important. The term blue carbon didn't even really come about, wasn't a thing until about 2010. And there's it's no coincidence that, it was basically 2010 when Kevin and I said, we have to figure out a way and a program, an organization or something to make to make the story around climate change more interesting, make it tangible, and bring the ocean into it. What's the best way that we can possibly do this? Well, Kevin and I are both surfers. We both love the ocean. We grew up around it, right? I grew up in Virginia Beach. He grew up in Manhattan Beach in LA, right? So we kind of went back, and it was probably me who came up with this and said, really interesting when you look around. I think Apple at the time had just named their operating system Mavericks, right? So after California's most famous big wave spot, right? and you look around and literally every single organization, for-profit company out there in the world is using the imagery and the story of the ocean and surfing and beach culture to sell everyone whatever they want to try to sell them, right? And we're talking about they've made themselves the richest companies in the world, right? Market cap of $1 trillion, right? And we kind of said, hey, if all of these companies have been doing this, for the last 120 years, what if we took that same power and said, instead of selling people something that they don't need, that typically messes up the planet, what if we use the power of the ocean to tell the story and to sell people what they really need, which is a livable planet? That was the idea. It's like, let's use surfing to actually do that, right? It's already the eye candy that everyone else uses. What if we could do it, within global surf culture, which also includes the global business side of it, and how could we actually do that, right? So that's the genesis of like why we said, cool, well, let's use this as the lens to look at this bigger problem in a more compelling way.
That's cool. And then was the initial goal to just make change within the surf industry? Did you even realize that this was going to become a global issue for you? Was it just, hey, if we can make some change here within our world of surfing, that would be cool? Or were you already thinking beyond that?
Well, yeah, it might be cool to say like, oh, we never even thought about this. But no, that's actually the opposite. This has been a very carefully planned out step by step. Not that we've known what we're going to do every single time, but it was at the heart of what we knew we were going to be doing. Is that it was never about, can we make surfing more sustainable? It was really about, if we can do this in this little fishbowl here, right? Mm-hmm. And globally speaking, the business of surfing, right, is about $14 billion right now. In the overall scheme of things, that's peanuts, right? But surfing as this cultural phenomenon is a juggernaut, right? It is literally everywhere. And so it has an outsized communications. It is an outsized communications platform for telling the kind of story that we wanted. So it was always about, let's look at the issue of climate change, and very specifically, how do we end up trying to solve it through the lens of the global surf culture? And it's been a step-by-step thing. And we started off with the initial programs, and I'm happy to go into those. And we are we are where we are right now because of all the steps that we did to actually get here.
Got it. Is Ecoboards one of those programs that you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly, right? So we figured, okay, what's the hardest thing in surfing we could ever try to make more sustainable? And we said, surfboards, right? That's the one thing that, I mean, if you're a surfer, what do you have to have? You have to have a surfboard, right? It's sort of the iconic, symbol of the entire sport and the art and things like that. And, we looked at this and basically said, hey, like, thinking about what could be a catalyst for change, right? Because, stepping back to, 2010 and before, sustainability as a core value within surfing was non-existent, right? And that's actually, that was the disconnect that both Kevin and myself felt. It's like, man, all of this conversation around sustainability and climate change and whatever else is happening outside of surfing. We're passionate surfers. How is it possible it's not happening within surfing? Which is, we're kind of like the canary in the coal mine here. We're closest to where the impacts that you can actually see from climate change are already happening, right? So forget about climate change as this global, thing that deals with, parts per million and average temperature and whatever else. The very first impacts from climate change were showing up in the ocean, being ocean warming, right? Which was actually causing lots of major problems, including marine heat waves, which is what is killing all of the coral. That's why I brought up chasing coral, right?
Right.
And right now we're on track. So we've lost 50% of the world's coral in the last 50 years. And if we don't change the trajectory, we're, about 90% of the world's coral could be gone by 2035. That's only 15 years away. All of it could be gone except for deep water coral, by 2050, right? Those things should be moving us forward, but that wasn't even part of the conversation there, right? You also have sea level rise, right? You have ocean acidification, all this kind of stuff, right? All really hard to talk about. And so that was, kind of our task. We're like, okay, can we get this conversation started in surfing? What would be the one way that we could do to focus on that? And the surfboard, just like the Ecoboard that you see behind me here, was kind of the gold standard. We figured if we could do it with surfboards, we could do it with literally anything, right? And here's one key thing that made it possible. Surfboards and custom building of surfboards has its sort of heart and soul in Southern California. In terms of the global market and where surfing really took off as a cultural sport after Californians and others went to the homeland of Hawaii, where surfing is actually historically from, raised up to a high art. They went there and sort of said this is amazing, brought it back home, and that's where the global surfing industry came from, right? So it turns out that that a lot of the best surfboards, the ones that people want to ride, the top shapers, it's still kind of like a home business in that most of the surfboards that people really want to ride, the best ones, are not made in some gigantic factory somewhere else. It was actually being done by local shapers within Southern California. And it wasn't just one size fits all. The ethos of surfing is you get the shaper to build you the kind of board that's good for you. And if you're going to ask for a custom board, size, shape, width, color, you could also ask for more sustainable materials, right? So right there, we could actually insert ourselves and say, here's how we can get the conversation started right here, which is we want to build, it wasn't that we wanted to build eco boards and have people buy more sustainable surfboards from Michael and Kevin, right? Who wants to do that? We went to the top shapers and just said, here's what we're thinking about. Would you be willing to build boards with these more sustainable materials? And at that point, it was more sustainable versions of the foam blank that's on the inside and the resin, which all the boards are actually made of. So we started working with some of the early pioneers who were working on bio-based epoxy zero VOC resins, surfboard blank companies that were looking at doing recycled content as a part of their blanks, trying bio content, and it was, the people who had done the hard work to make those materials available to the marketplace, to the shapers, and the surfboard factories locally here that could order them piecemeal, right? They weren't ordering them thousands at a time. If someone wanted a more sustainable surfboard, they could say, great, well, I'm going to go and order, this blank or this resin, and I can get it done. So there was a point for us to insert ourselves into the marketplace in order to actually get the surfboards headed in that direction.
So 2 questions on that. One, were the shapers open to this? Maybe it sounds like it might have been more expensive initially for them to create a more eco-friendly board.
Right.
And 2, were the surfers open to this? Because I would imagine at the end of the day, as much as having an eco-friendly board would sound good, they want to make sure that that board's going to perform. So
exactly right
on those 2 fronts.
Yeah, well, back to the issue of like, hey, let's try to do the hardest thing we can, and if we can do that, we can do anything. You have 2 dynamics in surfing. Old school crusty shapers who are some of the best in the world And they've honed their craft, for decades with materials that they know and understand and work, right? Like technically have good performance. And here come along Michael and Kevin saying, hey, we know you've already got this figured out. It's a hard business anyway with low margins. We'd like you to, try these materials that could mess up your whole process, and we're not even sure people are going to be open to them, but we have this idea. We know enough people that are open to it. And the idea of like, hey, everyone else is asking, hey, what's a more sustainable option for, my pizza or my milk or, cheese or meat or, beer or, whatever else. It wasn't that much of a stretch to say people are going to be coming into a surf shop or they're going to be coming to you and saying, I'd like to get a more ocean-friendly, eco-friendly surfboard. What do you have? And all we're doing is saying, we're trying to give you that answer. We're not trying to disrupt your business. We're trying to help your business and look ahead, right? So, we're trying to help you future-proof your business because people will be coming to you asking for this.
So how many threw you right out the door versus saying,
Most
oh,
of
it
them.
actually makes sense?
Most of them, but hey, I think the key here is that we're lifelong surfers. We understand the culture. We came from it, right? So we weren't outsiders just saying, we weren't some nerds from a sustainability, coalition or
Yeah.
sort of collab saying
Yeah.
you as an industry should do this. We came and said, hey, we're surfers. We want to actually see this. We know lots of other people that want this, and it's probably a latent thing. People don't know that they actually want this, but enough of them are, and it's going to be coming. And we really came to it with tons of humility, right? These are hardworking, blue-collar jobs, and we're definitely not looking to disrupt that. We're looking to disrupt the materials that were being used, the processes, the waste that was being generated, all that stuff, all of that, but not the actual business. In fact, we wanted to make it more lucrative for them to be working with better materials and frankly, to be charging more for the amazing product that they make. I mean, if you wanted to get a custom tennis racket, can you get one? No. A custom shoe, a custom basketball? No, but you can get a custom surfboard, right? And those things shouldn't cost rock bottom. There should be a premium on there. The amount of time and energy and different craft people that have to be employed to make, a board like that Channel Islands board back there, is absolutely amazing. You have like 4 different people doing a job, and any one of them could mess up at some point and tank the whole thing. And the little bit of margin that is in a surfboard, is then goes out the window. So we came with a lot of humility and came asking questions and said, tell us how this normally works. How can we best help you do this? And, we found some really amazing shapers who said, okay, I get this. In fact, the first one, it might be kind of surprising, but we didn't end up going to the obvious candidates like, the people from Patagonia making surfboards or some version of that, right? We actually went into the high performance, core SoCal surfboard market and said, let's try to do this. Like, it would be too easy to go find a surfboard builder who was already doing the right thing, right? The best kind of materials. We actually wanted to go to the heart and soul of it. And a really amazing old school, but young at heart shaper named Timmy Patterson, who's actually based out of San Clemente, California. He has, he's been making amazing high performance surfboards, and lots of other shapers in the area, have learned their craft from him, watching him. And currently he is actually the board shaper, the board builder for the #1 top ranked professional surfer in the world, a Brazilian surfer named Italo Ferreira. So still at the top of his game, but Timmy's a rad, core surfer, and we were talking about how we live our lives, and he was talking about, yeah, I grow veggies in the garden, and we have chickens out back, we get eggs, like we want to do the right thing. So yeah, if you guys are saying there's a better way to do this, and it's not going to mess up my business but help it, then let's talk about this, right? And he actually built the first eco surfboard that we built, and it was kind of amazing, right? That we're able to get someone at that level, and then we just built it out, from there. So we literally started with ones and twos, and at this point we have it's about 350 different individual surfboard builders around the world.
Wow, that's amazing.
From the biggest top brands down to the backyard shapers who are essentially saying, hey, I build 10 boards a year for myself and friends, but I want to use the best materials. How can I do this as well?
So I actually have a very timely, cool story about one of those shapers that I had.
Yeah, our very first Ecoboard builder, actually. Yeah.
Really? Okay, cool. So I would be remiss if I didn't share the story. So you don't probably know this, Michael, but I've paddleboarded and for the record, I'm a paddleboarder, not a surfer, and don't hang up on me because I know not all surfers love paddleboarders, but I don't get anywhere near the surfers. I'm out there with
your own ocean tribe, man. Yeah, exactly. Hey, well, listen, I have surfboards here, but there's also paddleboards from Starboard behind me and things like that. We're whatever floats your boat is kind of our motto, right?
And just don't get in my way. So the story is I started paddling every day in 2010 right here in Laguna Beach. And after about 5 years of paddling every day, I had a nice board, but not a custom board.
Yep.
And one day I said, I want to create a really cool custom board. I don't have any tattoos. So I said, I'm going to create a board that if I were to ever get tattoos, this would be what would be tattooed all over my body, and I'm going to put it on a paddleboard instead. And so I created a artwork for a board that I think over the years became somewhat iconic.
It did.
The nose of the board is a really cool image of Jimi Hendrix, and then the bottom of the board, the tail end, is Bob Marley. At the very tip of the board was the Buddha, and the Buddha kind of shined his light into Jimmy, and Jimmy played this music, and then there's a picture of Bob, and he's just smiling.
Totally,
and
yeah.
When I came up with that design, I can't remember who it was, but somebody referred me to a shaper up in your neck of the woods, Bob Pearson in Santa Cruz.
Yep.
And he at that time had a relationship with Laird, and so this was actually one of the last Laird subs that Bob ever shaped. It was a 14-foot Laird sub. And
didn't know that about the actual board. That's cool.
Yeah, and not an eco-friendly board. It shifts to an eco-friendly story. And it never even crossed my mind, quite honestly. This is probably 6 years ago that to create an eco-friendly board. It wasn't in my consciousness. I was just trying to create a beautiful board that would be fast and be good for what I do out in the ocean, photograph dolphins and whales. So I create this board. It took about 18 months. I get the board, fall in love with it, have had, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000 amazing paddles and dolphin and whale encounters, including orcas and you name it with this board. And
I've seen it. It's amazing.
No, thank you. And then what happened was over the years, just wear and tear, this 25-pound board all of a sudden was 35 pounds and just getting too heavy to lug up and down the cliff and a little sluggish out on the water. So I said, it's time to retire this thing. And it was hard for me because I was like, where do I go from this? Like, I just love that board. Right. So then I came up with the next design, and that was to put a mermaid on the board. And I'm like, okay, now I got to do it right and create an eco-friendly board. And I was introduced to Ryan Harris of Earth Technologies, and I literally just picked it up last week. It is a 100% eco-friendly, zero-waste board.
Amazing.
I was with Ryan in his little dungeon there, and he showed me the entire process. In fact, I shot a lot of video. We're going to edit that and make a little
amazing. Okay, great.
Podcast out of that. And Ryan's
amazing, huh?
Yeah, tell me. What my question to you is: how much of that board that Ryan created is your doing? That's what I want to know.
Well, again, it's like it really comes down to this is what Ryan's building, right? And interesting story about Ryan is that he was literally the first person that we were working with to create eco-friendly boards, right? So a lot of the surfboards that we were getting other top-notch shapers to shape and craft, they would be built in terms of the resin, the fiberglass, the sanding, the finishing by Ryan at Earth Technologies, because he was one of the first and early adopters of those materials and how to work with them and how they differed from traditional polyurethane and polyester materials that a traditional surfboard is actually made out of, right? These are, the board that you have is actually made with EPS foam or expanded polystyrene and a bio-based or plant-based epoxy resin, right? Those materials are more expensive. They aren't necessarily more difficult to work with, but it's a different process. It takes longer. You have to, there's, and to Ryan's credit, he basically dove in and said, the only kind of boards I want to be making are eco boards. So he started from a very different spot, right? Where most of what we were doing in the beginning was going to people who'd been building surfboards, for decades.
Convincing them to change, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, while we won't take any credit for the work that, Ryan has done and the materials and things.
And if you want, man, you can.
Yeah, well, hey, it was, it's like collaborating with friends. It's almost like a band, right? And we were there saying, hey, well, we can help source these materials. We can do the carbon footprint, So Ryan wants to work with these materials. And part of what we did is come along and say, great, well, let's work with you and let's do a life cycle assessment of the carbon footprint of what a surfboard is, right? So we worked with Ryan and a couple of other top companies so that we had the mix really. So we actually worked with Firewire surfboards to get sort of a international footprint. We worked with Channel Islands for a bigger sort of gold standard, but they still build boards there in California. And then Ryan, the smaller, not like a backyard shaper, but a smaller producer and manufacturer. And we connected energy meters to the shaping bay, to heating and ventilation, all this stuff. We would measure the blank before it was shaped, after it was shaped. We're getting the waste footprint. We're doing the carbon footprint of the raw materials, all that kind of stuff, so that we're working essentially in collaboration. So we can say, actually, that you're working with better materials, but we come along as a science-based nonprofit organization that wants there to be an answer when someone comes to a surf shop or to a surfer and says, hey, can you show me the more ocean-friendly version of a surfboard? Because that's what I'm interested in. There was not an answer until we came along and did that in collaboration with the surfboard builders like Ryan, or specifically Ryan, right? Yeah. So that's what we brought to it, was we can now tell you exactly how much better this version is than the standard polyester and polyurethane version of that exact same board are.
That's amazing. And yeah, so you guys were like the first super group for eco-friendly boards.
Kind of, yeah. And and listen, the Ecoboard Project really is super simple. It just boils down to, it's the exact same version of like the certified organic logo for food, but in our case, ocean friendly or ocean friendlier for every cool action board that floats, whether it's surfboard, stand-up paddleboard, a kite board, a foil board, a skim board, whatever else.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's and that's where we've expanded to. So yeah, we started with just high performance surfboards, and we've expanded out into absolutely everything at this particular point.
Well, let's talk about that's awesome. Like I said, I shot some pretty cool footage at Ryan's
Yep.
spot, and we'll got to edit that, and we can release that because people can actually see the whole process, which it was pretty amazing. So to me,
let me just wait. Sorry, there's one sort of key thing that's definitely worth mentioning, because it's sort of the through line to all the things that we do, to how all of our programs work, and specifically what we're doing now to scale up the current project, which is called SeaTrees, right? So the key thing so there were basically like 3 kind of key things about what makes a Ecoboard more ocean friendly, more sustainable than a non-eco version of it, right? One is it has to have a measurably reduced carbon footprint. And a board that carries the certification does. And on the low side, it's about 30% less. On the high side, it could be 70% less. That's a dramatic drop in the size of the carbon footprint of the board. It's also eliminating the use of more toxic types of materials that include the use of styrene, which is a federally listed carcinogen, VOCs that are being given off, materials that can't be recycled, bio-based materials, or processes that produce more waste, which is also a big part of the overall footprint, right? And that goes directly towards the issue that we're fundamentally focused on, which is how do we talk about climate change, make people even aware of it, and then provide an on-ramp, right? A solution for them to actually get started on their own journey, to get involved. That's the real genius of picking a surfboard to focus on, as opposed to saying, hey, Quicksilver or Hurley or Billabong, you guys should look at your global footprint for apparel and the supply chain and whatever else. That's not a great. I mean, those are all key important things, but it's not a great way, especially back in 2011, to get the conversation started about, hey, this is important. Because just like you had in your own personal story, right? You didn't even realize that, I didn't even think about my surfboard being more sustainable. I didn't even think that was an option, right?
Yeah, never crossed my mind.
Right. But when it does, what does it do? It basically says, okay, that's right. My surfboard has a carbon footprint. Oh, and I can do something about that, and this feels good. What else in my life is making a carbon footprint? Oh, the car I drive, how I get my power, the food that it's like everything has a climate impact. And if we can get the conversation started, which is literally the hardest thing to do, period, right? If we can get that started because surfing is cool, surfboards are cool, surfers are totally different around the world, but the one thing that will always bring them together is surfboards and how cool they are, right? So that was a great vehicle to make that part happen. And it allowed us to say, cool, now this connects to the climate change issue, right? In a meaningful way. And so all of our programs have that as a through line and have used that same, engagement, people are passionate about it, to raise this issue in a real tangible way. And we always, all of our programs, they're never just talking about, a particular issue and that it's a problem or whatever else. If we talk about a problem, then we have a program that addresses that in some meaningful way, in a way that an individual or a brand or an organization can actually do something about the issue we're talking about. They can take a step. They can get started. They can get started on their own journey.
Very good. So let's segue into SeaTrees. But you mentioned there was three things, and you mentioned reduced carbon footprint. Did you share the other two?
Yeah. So basically, looking at how could we sidestep, so instead of saying, okay, well, how can we, is there something that we can do and capture the styrene somehow and then try to do something here out of that? It's like, what if you just switch materials and didn't have the problem in the first place.
So,
it's that kind of systems thinking, right? It's like, instead of like, hey, how can we clean up all this mess at the end of the pipeline? What if we jumped to the front of the problem and said, is there something that's better, that might even be better performing, which the Ecoboard Project certified material or qualified materials are, right? Like the foams, the resins, the fibers, and the shift towards natural fibers like hemp and flax and things, those things actually perform better too, right? What if we actually just said, why don't we not even have that problem by using different materials, right? And then the third thing really is the processes, right? So it's, how do we not make as much waste in the first place? Because it turns out, and no one knew this, including us, 40% of the carbon footprint of any surfboard is the waste that is generated from it, right? So if you have processes that are less wasteful in the beginning, and this comes down to wasting resin, to all that kind of stuff, well then you don't have that problem, period. And then what's cool, right? Based on that, and again, this kind of goes back to Ryan and what he's doing to shift his Ecoboard only building factory to also being zero waste, or being on a path towards zero waste. It's always a journey, it's never a destination. But yeah, so now when Ryan looks at waste, right? And this is again something that we were collaboratively working on, right? Because we have other programs where we look at waste and we try to upcycle it into a new product. Old wetsuits into new yoga mats, right? Styrofoam packaging into new surfboard EPS cores, right? Ryan looked at all the resin and the stir sticks and the gloves and the tape and everything that it took to build a surfboard and said, what if I looked at that as a resource instead of a waste? Actually, we have a good friend that we've worked with before called Michael Semonitis. He's got a company called Wastebusters. We've worked with him at several events, including our very first event that we kicked off back in 2011 here in San Francisco, the Rip Curl Pro Search. It's actually kind of what launched the company. He said something to me when we first were working on that. He said, waste is just resource in the wrong place, right? And that is like such a key way. That's systems thinking, right? You're like, how do I just avoid this and get rid of this challenge? And Ryan is now taking the waste off of his floor and the drip trays and everything. He's grinding that up. And that's actually now the material that he's using to make new skateboard decks, right? And cool like coasters like this. I don't know if you can see this.
I have a shot glass.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. It's like I've got little sort of plant holders, right? Like this is all old surfboard waste from the bottom of Ryan's floor, and it's turned from waste into like this is what we're
art.
Yeah, we're planting little succulents in. On my desk, I now have something. Yeah, I mean it's like that is the kind of change that we're trying to instill in people in big and small ways, in their own lives, in their own businesses, in their own communities, right?
Beautiful. So let's talk about even bigger change, and that is SeaTrees.
Yeah.
Let's go deep there.
I
would imagine that you want
sort of what the moment was that. Yeah.
Let's get into all that. My guess would be that you wanted to find something that resonated on a global scale beyond just the surf community. And you've said, I don't know if this quote came from you or someone else in your organization, but we believe the ocean is the hero at the center of our story, and we can work with it to reverse climate change. So let's, for people that don't know what SeaTrees is, share please what it is and how it is helping reverse climate change.
Yeah, easy. But I'm going to take 30 seconds and show you how this through line from working with Ryan on the Ecoboard project side of things is one of the ways that we actually got here. it's sort of that concept of, a lot of the work that we were originally doing with all of our programs. So Ecoboard Project, an upcycling program called Waste to Waves. We have a event sustainability program called Deep Blue Events that we ran with the World Tour, the Vans Triple Crown of Surfing, and 9 years running with the Vulcan Pipe Pro. Like most environmental nonprofits who are trying to get people to help protect the planet and change their behavior, we've been asking people to do less bad, right? Hey, could you do a little less bad?
That's good.
And, and that's where we had to start. And that's actually even going back to saying, hey, this was a planned step-by-step thing of how we actually got here. Because keep in mind, I was doing carbon offsetting and focused on conservation programs, forestry, direct conservation programs before I started Sustainable Surf. So it's always, and it's always been there. We've always worked on programs that had carbon footprinting and reducing that as part of what they were doing. 7 years into Sustainable Surf, it's kind of like the 7-year itch or something. It was really like, okay, at this point, we need to shift people from doing just less bad to doing real direct good. How can we best enable that to happen? And lo and behold, the conversation around blue carbon ecosystems and even the understanding, by top scientists and world bodies like the UN and the Climate Network, it was actually being seen as like, oh, right, maybe the ocean is important. Maybe the coastal ecosystems that actually are doing the work that hasn't been recognized before of water filtration, of biodiversity hotspots, of sequestering carbon. That was actually now coming to the forefront. And so it was basically time to say, let's build a program that will allow people to focus directly on not just reducing the carbon footprint that they have by doing less bad, but working on the big problem that we must work at the same time, which is removing the carbon that we've already put up into the atmosphere, right? And the only way to do that, especially at scale, any kind of cost-effective wise, that also has all of these other amazing benefits that come along with it, is using using plants to basically suck carbon dioxide emissions out of the air and sequester it and store it back into the earth, which is where it came from in the first place before we dug it up and burned it to power our modern world, right? So that was basically the task ahead of us. It was like, okay, well, how do we do that? And it's not like there weren't carbon offsetting, organizations and whatever else before, but again, they had the wrong story. It was about carbon offsetting and about this credit and whatever else. And while that may be in the background of things that we do, the story that we're leading with is what's important about this is these blue carbon ecosystems. And quick definition of that, blue carbon is just carbon sequestered in marine ecosystems. But it's the ecosystems that actually are doing the hard work. That's what matters. That's the kelp forest, which we have right off of the west coast of California and Washington and Oregon and Canada, right? Down in Mexico. Mangrove forests, which are basically around the entire world in the tropics. Coral reefs, seagrass, ridge to reef watershed protection, peat forests, right? All of these places are critically important in a number of different ways. And I'll just break it down quickly, and then I'll stop and you can answer, or you can ask me some more questions about blue carbon. But basically, these ecosystems are the most efficient and most effective way of sequestering carbon. So mangrove forests are somewhere between, depends on the type and whatever else, but between 5 to 10 times more efficient at storing carbon than a similar sized tropical rainforest, right? Seagrass is even more. It's like 50 times more effective. Peat is even more, right? They also provide all these other benefits like protection from storms, coastal erosion, water quality, increased fish stocks, increased biodiversity, protection, the economic engine and the refrigerator for many local communities all around the world that actually live in these ecosystems, right? So if we could actually help people understand that these are critically important and they're the places where a lot of us end up, playing and working around. Again, if we could connect those and say, you may not see these all that often, but these are important. These underwater forests that you probably don't know about that are just offshore, of that lovely beach that you want to walk on. They're critical for the entire ocean health, but also for the local community and biodiversity that's right there. And in many cases, many of them are critically injured at the moment. If we can get people to care about that and then also say, and we've created a platform for you to be able to take action directly where we're helping to restore and protect those ecosystems with our partners around the world, then that's a win-win for everyone, right? And that's the real genesis of, this is what the SeaTrees program needs to do. This is the issue that we're trying to solve, and here's how we're going to do it. And it's going to be a positive story, engaging story. We're not going to be asking people to do less bad, asking them to do real good, and we're going to make it as easy to, do ocean conservation as it is to, hop on your phone and order a pizza or something from Amazon, or catch a lift, right? That's how ocean conservation, that's how ocean activism needs to be looking like going forward from here.
It's a beautiful model. Explain how the platform actually works. Get real specific with that.
Yeah, super easy. We want people to be able to plant mangroves, restore kelp forests, restore coral reefs. And conservation groups have made it really hard for people to be able to dip in and actually directly help fund those things, right? A nonprofit organization like a great one like Conservation International that does this type of work. In fact, they're leaders on this. They've been leaders in the blue carbon movement. But it's hard for an individual to say, cool, I just want to focus on, this part. I want to help plant trees here. It's sort of opaque. It's like, okay, we can donate money to this nonprofit and then these are on their programs and yada, yada. We basically said, what if we could, skip most of that and connect people directly through their online life, so laptop, mostly phone, and allow them to plant, 10 mangrove trees on their phone in about 30 seconds, and know that that is going directly towards not a generalized, mangrove project somewhere or education or whatever else, but towards actually putting those trees in a specific place. And we're going to then use what we know about storytelling and engaging and using our athlete ambassadors and our rad brand partners to tell that story about the place and the impact that's actually happening. So that's what we've done. So you can go on to sea-trees.org. We also have the .com version of that as well. Just Google it. And yeah, you can literally go and, cool, I want to plant 10 mangrove trees. Boom, you can do it. We also try to find a way to make it incredibly easy for anyone to say yes to actually doing that. So you can plant trees, restore mangroves, do kelp. But if you want a cool product that you want to get that actually does good, then we also have that. We have artist collaborations that we've done where we've made hats and straws. We've worked with Andy Davis. We're going to be working with Charlie Calhoun and our friends at Kind Humans on a urchin shirt. Those types of things. And when people buy them, the conservation impact is built in. So we're going to be restoring, 5 square feet of California kelp forest, or planting 7 mangroves in our project in Indonesia when you buy this product off of the website, right?
Nice.
So that's how that works. It's pretty easy and cut and dry. But how many people do we really reach at this particular point? We have, I don't know, 20,000 followers plus on our social media platform for Sustainable Surf, another 10 or 12 for SeaTrees. We do a lot to get the word out there. But in terms of scaling this up and getting this in front of eyeballs of millions of people around the world, we knew we had to actually make this not just a platform and a program for individuals, but for brand partners, right? So if we could help them do good with their own products and their work or services, and then we enable them and help them to tell the story of what they're doing, and then invite their own community to join them, that's how this moves from, cool small project in the surf community and the surf culture towards a global engine that is absolutely going to be a key piece of how we end up reversing climate change in the future and making an incredible dent in it within the next 10 years, which is what the UN Global Network of Scientists have all said we have to do specifically around climate change in the next 10 years before we likely pass a tipping point in climate that we're not going to come back from. It's already built in fairly bad right now. If we pass that tipping point, if we haven't begun in earnest the process of reducing emissions on one hand and sucking the climate load, the time bomb basically that we've put up into the atmosphere and into the ocean, then the world is going to be a very hard place to live, not just in the future sometime, but in the near future, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid. And if we can do it in a positive way that actually impacts real landscapes and pull money that's essentially sitting on the table, we think, out of individuals' pockets and brands' marketing budgets, and put that directly into the projects that actually do the real work, of reversing climate change. And this is like absolutely key to it, is that, these projects where we do the work, we're not the people that are on the ground actually doing the work, right? We work with local reputable groups in all of these places that are focused on working with the local community in that place to actually do the work, to do the planting of the trees, to do the growing of the coral pieces and putting it out there, right? To be protecting the landscape. And that is a key critical element of how these landscapes are regenerated and protected in the long term.
So now I have questions. So first of all, thank you for.
That's a lot to chew on, but yeah, now
a lot of kelp to chew on there, but no, this is good stuff. So first of all, thank you for coming up with this and doing this. It's a beautiful, amazing model that you've created. And what I love about the model most is that when people support it, you can draw a direct correlation between money donated and results. So it's very solution based. Plus, I think people want to know the difference that their money is making. Overall, it's just a super cool idea. Like, who would not want to see the sea forest of the world continue to flourish? So,
exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. So, questions: Where are you planting trees, and how are you choosing these areas?
Great question. So, right now we have, I think, 6 different projects that we've been supporting. So, with mangrove forest. So, let's just take that one. So we have a project that's in the Papua region of Indonesia. So about as far east as you can get before you hit Papua New Guinea. Absolutely amazing place. And we've been working there for the last, I think, 2.5 years. with our local partners there from Eden Projects, and we had the opportunity to basically move from the main island of Biak to one of the outlying islands and actually focus all of our efforts in this last year on restoring the mangrove forest and the estuary system on that particular island, right? So that was really cool because it wasn't just one piece of a larger estuary system with other partners in it. It allowed us to say, we're actually going to put up the money ahead of time to do this. The project wouldn't have happened unless we brought money and committed to, planting hundreds of thousands of trees in this area long term over 2 or 3 years, right? So that one is amazing. You can actually go on to the SeaTrees website and then look at all of our projects, see exactly where they are. Look at the coordinates, the GPS coordinates, right? See the photos, see the videos, see exactly what's happening. There's a interactive map that's with there for every project from our partners at Open Forest, right? So we try to do everything that we can to push people towards, going and seeing where their money is actually making an impact by planting these trees in that particular system. That's great. We actually had so much interest in this last year in 2020 from different brand partners that we actually had to find another amazing place for us to do this work. We needed more mangrove trees to basically plant, which was a great problem to have, right?
Great problem right there.
Fantastic problem, right? So, and in this case, instead of working with another partner who had sort of an existing project that they were either trying to do or trying to fund, we took the opportunity to basically create our own project, from scratch with a local community group. We also wanted to focus a project on in the Indian Ocean, and we had the opportunity, and there's this amazing estuary system in Kenya, actually. So it's in southern Kenya. It's about an hour north of the second largest city called Mombasa. And we picked Kenya for a couple of different reasons. So one, this estuary is actually it's part of the first and oldest national park system. So it's in an MPA, a marine protected area. This site is also a UNESCO biodiversity hotspot. It's a critical habitat for birds, for migratory birds, key habitat for sea turtles, right? Like all the right things. And it had pressures from development that were happening, basically cutting down trees for charcoal and lumber being degraded, things, the sedimentation happening. And we had a local partner that had been doing sea turtle restoration habitat work there in the estuary because it's so key. And what's the best way to try to protect sea turtles? It's sort of the same thing that other partners of ours, like from Wildlife Works, and I'll get to that in just a second. If you want to protect a species, whether it's humans or sea turtles, it comes down to protecting their habitat, right? So that's how we basically started working with them, because it really became apparent. It's like, great, well, we need people to be protecting this mangrove forest because that's where the clean water comes from. In the estuary part is where the seagrass actually grows that the sea turtles eat. So we just launched that project. We actually just started planting in this year in January, and we're going to be on track to plant over 1 million trees in this project in Kenya in the next 12 months.
Wow.
And
Just that
it's
one spot.
absolutely fantastic.
So I was going to ask you a question, and you might have just answered it. My question was going to be, how does planting trees in Indonesia or on
Yeah.
a remote island halfway around the world impact the rest of the planet? And what I'm hearing from you, tell me if I'm right, is number one, it's going to have a very specific impact on the ecosystem that you are protecting. And
Right.
at the
Yep.
same time, as it draws down carbon on halfway around the world, it's going to impact the carbon impact over the entire planet. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it's like that bumper sticker, right? It's like sort of think globally and act locally, right? So one of the key things about our project is that it actually creates all of these localized positive benefits from employment to gender equity to education. Uh, uh, Basically everything that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, often called the SDGs, there's 17 of them,
Hmm.
that are trying to enable to end up making a just, livable, sustainable world for everyone within the next 10 years, right? Um, so our projects produce all of those local impacts there within the community, with the landscape, all that. But it also has a global impact, which is, and here's kind of how carbon offsets work, is that carbon doesn't stay in one spot. Like if I have a carbon footprint here, it's not like it actually stays here and is hovering over me. Carbon gets distributed, around the world. It goes out. It's essentially like throwing a warm blanket around the world, right? It's the greenhouse effect. Sunlight comes through, it can't bounce back out, so that's how the world and the oceans start heating up, right? And that is a global issue. And basically, it comes down to, if you can reduce carbon being emitted anywhere in the world, it actually doesn't matter where you do that in terms of climate change and the global carbon footprint, which is why, instead of trying to say, hey, let's have all of our projects, here in California or right in my backyard, we can have a portfolio where we're trying to think about the actual the direct local impacts, and then that's the local,
Hmm.
and then on the global side of things, reducing the overall carbon load that's going up into the atmosphere.
It's a beautiful model. So you mentioned partnerships. You actually
Yep,
emailed me right before we went live here that I think it was a brand new partnership that you're super excited about with
just
WeTransfer.
announced today. Yeah, exactly. So, so our brand new partners at WeTransfer, which is great because we've actually been using our WeTransfer with a bunch of the different creative folks, like Morgan Masson. He's a super rad, filmmaker who's actually been doing some work for another brand partner, who's part of the SeaTrees program called Oliver Brown. They're an apparel company. They help to they help us fund the restoration work in the Palos Verdes Kelp Project. And Morgan was just there, and he's sending us, the video and the files to look at using WeTransfer. So it's just this like amazing thing when they came to us and said, "Hey, we really like what SeaTrees is actually doing, and we want to activate on our own, and then encourage the rest of our." I think they've got 291 million users around the world, right? To tell them about what's going on and the importance of this, right? And that's kind of a great, that's a great partner to look at, because if you come to us saying, oh, well, these guys are SeaTrees and sustainable surf, they're only focused on, global surfing culture or something like that. And it's the absolute opposite. We're trying to do what Apple has done, what Google has done, right? What every car company or apparel company has done, which is to say, cool, let's use the eye candy appeal of surfing and beach culture,
Hmm.
and help it to sell what the world needs, which is the restoration, protection of blue carbon ecosystems.
And what did We Transfer commit to?
Yeah, so basically, they are planting almost 170,000 SeaTrees on our platform, and they're doing actually a mix. So they're helping it's basically sort of half and half. So half of it is going to to planting mangroves in the brand new Kenya project, and half is going to the Palos Verdes kelp restoration project. So
Beautiful. That's
a
so
great
awesome.
mix, right? Yeah.
Super exciting. So let's talk about kelp.
Yep.
I have a personal opinion because here in Laguna Beach, we have not only an MPA, marine protected area, but it's a no-take zone 6 miles of our coastline of Laguna Beach. And inside of the MPA is a large kelp forest. I spent a lot of time in there. And as you know, it's
Paddling around it, right?
all the time. And
Yep.
it's a whole universe within that kelp. Why is kelp so important?
Ah. Okay, I'll try to not go too deep, but I'm going to go way back on this one, right? I don't know if you've ever heard of something called the Kelp Highway. Probably haven't, right?
I have not.
Yeah, well, it's the reason that humans even got to, North America, and it's a fascinating story, right? So basically, when sea levels were lower in a colder period, there's a land bridge from Russia, basically, right, over these sort of Aleutian Islands, whatever else. That's how the first peoples came to America. And the scientists were, trying to figure out, like, wow, it's kind of weird because we're finding evidence of humans being down here, but it doesn't match up with the geologic record of when this route down here was still blocked by 1,000-foot tall walls of ice, right, from the ice ages. And they're like, this is just like, how was that possible? Because the route really wasn't open yet. And the secret is that these people had boats, man, and they had a highway. There's a band of kelp running all the way from Alaska, all the way from that, all the way down to South America. It is literally how humans traveled. And as you probably know from paddling around there, who lives in a kelp forest? Every marine species you could possibly think of, right? Especially the ones you want to eat, right? Like lingcod and calico and sea urchins and abalone, right? And everything else, even the kelp itself, right? And every marine mammal goes in there.
Oh, yeah.
The whales actually use it.
Harper seals. We actually had a couple years ago. We had oh God, what do we have? They're only up by you. We had sea otters, which we've never had. We're down in the kelp forest, and
that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. The whales.
That's a sign of, right.
Whales go in there and hang out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whales use the kelp forest as a protection. Gray whales, if they have oh man, I'm forgetting what a baby whale is called. It's not a cub. It's a cat. Thank you. Yeah, right. So, yeah, they actually swim along the line of it, and they're using it as, like, cover and protection, even from, like, orcas that are,
for sure,
like, actually hunting them, right? So everyone uses it, yeah. And it was the pathway down. It was like a sidewalk for humans to actually come all the way down and get all the way down to South America.
That's awesome. I've never heard that before, by the way. So thank you for sharing that.
Fascinating science that's actually behind that. And because of the kelp forest ecosystem being basically nothing but abundance, basically everything that you would possibly need, from shelter, protection, food, all that kind of stuff. It hugs the coast like all the way down, unbroken, right? Or it used to be unbroken. So that's why kelp forests are incredibly important. Plus, it's a gigantic carbon sink in and of itself. Again, going back to climate change, and the studies that scientists are just now starting to do, again, No one thought that kelp forests were important towards regulating climate change, just in the way that they didn't think, mangrove forest or whatever else were 10 years ago. The science on trying to document and figure out how they actually are is being done right now. So the best science right now basically says that all the world's macroalgae, the kelp forests, about 11% of it actually breaks off, gets ripped up, and then carried out to the deep ocean and sinks. And once it sinks down, past about 1,000 feet, it's stored, for millions of years, because it's going to go down into the sediment, which is actually going to get turned into rock and whatever else. So scientists right now are going down and they're drilling in and taking, sediment samples and looking for the signature of the carbon from the actual kelp, right? To get an idea of how much they are a carbon sequestration sort of element. So it turns out that 11% of all the world's macroalgae, it's actually more carbon sequestered than all the world's mangrove forests. So it's incredibly important, just as a carbon sink. As an existing carbon sink, it's the entire forest, like all the things that you've seen, all the things that are good to eat, all the economic engine that it does. If the forest is gone, none of that exists, right? It would be like, walking into a redwood forest, cutting it all down within a year, and then asking, where's all the animals? Like, they're gone, man. If the forest isn't there, they're gone.
I've always been astonished at the fact that kelp can grow up to 2 feet a day. Think about
It
that.
is the fastest growing quote unquote plant. It's actually not a plant, it's algae. But yeah, in ideal conditions, up to 2 feet a day. Average conditions are basically 1 foot a day, right? There's nothing else that can actually touch that, which is actually one of the incredibly cool things about the kelp restoration projects that we're funding right now. So one in Palos Verdes. We actually have a new one that is just getting started right now up here in Monterey Bay with our partners at California Reef Check. And yeah, we're actually, they're putting in the grid this month for a place called Tankers Reef that's just outside of the Municipal Wharf area. Fingers crossed, we have some really sort of great plans. But the cool thing about it is that if you go in and you fix the problem with the kelp forest, which we haven't actually talked about yet, but it comes back to that art you see back there, which is a cool, yeah, that is basically a purple sea urchin shell. So we've talked about how critical and important kelp forests are. Why don't we talk about what the issue is right now related to climate change right here in California? Because most people don't have any idea of this. So long story short, particularly in Northern California, we've lost about 95% of the historical kelp forest that California historically has. And it's not just in California. Washington and Oregon and all the way up into BC, they all have this same problem. You got to ask, what happened to the kelp? Where did it go? Where did that Kelp Highway actually go, right? It turned out it's really simple. It's climate change. Specifically, it's a marine heat wave. So NOAA, the branch of the U.S. government that most people understand, it's focused on weather, right? They did their study about something that happened back in 2013. It's called the warm blob. And basically, it was this gigantic blob of warm water, 2013, 14, 15. It was off of the entire West Coast. It just sat there. That was a direct result of climate change impacts. In the same way that a marine heat wave is what's been taking out Australia's Great Barrier Reefs, which they've lost about 50% of it. It's the exact same dynamic. It's really simple. We change the water environment. We change the chemistry in the ocean when we dump all that heat in it, right? Again, the oceans have sucked up 90% of the heat that we've been creating from global warming. And here's a really mind-blowing fact. Every single second of the day, like every time I clicked my fingers, the amount of energy released by 4 hydrogen bombs about the size of the ones that got dropped on, that the Americans dropped on Nagasaki, that's how much heat is going into the ocean every single second.
Wow.
It's mind-blowing, right? So if you're asking, why do we have a marine heat wave? It's because we have way too much heat that we're dumping into the ocean, right? And what it did was, much like the plague and pandemic that we have right now, it basically created the conditions for a virus to attack the main predator of these little purple sea urchins, which was the starfish, and particularly the sunflower or the Death Star. This starfish would just mow down, keep the urchins under control. We also lost a major predator in the sea otters, which you talked about. We killed most of them off about 100 years ago, right? So again, we've been creating this imbalance in this entire ecosystem here. And what we essentially had with that heat wave was it's called a trophic cascade, right? So a virus took out all the sea stars. It was the sea star wasting disease. The urchins said, "Oh, this is great. There's no one eating us," and they populated, immensely. The warmer water is terrible for kelp to grow in because they need cold, nutrient-dense water in order to reproduce and to grow well, right? So all of this hit at it's called a perfect storm or a tipping point, right? This is a classic case of a tipping point. So within a year and a half, the urchin population exploded. And what they do when they're at that level, it's like this mass zombie army. They came, and what they did was they ate the holdfast, or the little sort of root kind of structure that's holding all the kelp to the rock reef. And they do that, and then the whole thing floats away. And that's how you wipe out an entire forest, basically like that. So what do you have now? You have basically this beautiful purple-looking carpet that's covering all of the rock reefs, and there's no more kelp forests. And the urchins that are in these urchin barrens, which are called because they're barren of anything else except an urchin, they're in a starvation mode. They actually go into this lockdown, kind of a hibernating sort of zombie mode, where they can actually exist for decades. So it's not something where it's like, oh, well, if the heat wave came and then it's passed, things are going to right themselves. No, because the urchin barrens are there now, and the urchins can literally last for decades. In Australia and Tasmania, they have urchin barrens that have persisted for more than 50 years, right? Because they can pull directly what they need, just the bare minimum, from the seawater itself. The urchins don't have any reproductive stuff going on, so there's no commercial value to the uni, right, that they would have, which is what you are eating. You're eating the urchin gonads when you go to a sushi restaurant, right? So they have no commercial value because they're almost empty. And anytime a little kelp forest or a little kelp plant tries to pop up, it's eaten immediately. They've also outcompeted every other animal that's in that ecosystem, right? So abalone, they're slow-growing sea snails that eat kelp, right? We haven't had an abalone season here in Northern California in 3 years, going on 4. They basically, unless this dynamic changes, there won't be another abalone season.
No.
Isn't that crazy, right? Well, they've also outcompeted the red urchin in many places, which is the commercially valuable one that the urchin divers are actually going out of, right? But again, they're outcompeting those. They're outcompeting everything, and they've taken away all the forests for all the other animals. And this is kind of fascinating because in the other cases of the ecosystems that we work in within SeaTrees, right? Mangroves, coral reefs. We're about to get started on a seagrass one. Mm-hmm. We're actually, directly putting plants back in some form. Coral's not a plant; it's an animal. But, with what's happening with the kelp forest, if we were to try to grow kelp, and people grow seaweed, right? And to try to use divers and put it back or put it on ropes or whatever else, if you haven't solved the urchin problem, they're just going to eat it, right?
Eat it, yeah.
So in terms of restoring a kelp forest, we're actually ending the, it's really cool. It's really ingenious. It's super low tech. And it's a process that was actually developed by our core partner called the Bay Foundation, executive director named Tom Ford. What he's put into practice is actually hiring out of work or underemployed urchin divers to go out and literally smash in place or cull with a rock hammer the urchins. So the way that you actually bring back the kelp forest in Northern California is you're going in and you're actually culling the urchins and getting them down to what the natural density would be in a normal kelp forest, right? So right now, normal density of purple sea urchins, which belong in a kelp forest, which are a key part of it, right? Like they belong there. They're not aliens. They're just completely out of balance. It's 2 to 3 per square meter. There's square meters in Northern California that have 70 to 120 urchins.
Oh yeah.
The rocks are absolutely covered.
I could walk you to tide pools right here, and that's what you'll see. They look like they were planted. There's just rows and rows of urchins out there.
It's absolutely crazy, right? So go down, smash them, and what little food they do have inside of them is then like you're not going to pick these things up at scale and try to take them out and put them someplace and whatever else. If you smash them in place, then whatever is available, including the carbon, calcium, what their shells and spines are actually made out of and what's inside of them, then whatever fish are actually there can eat that. That carbon and that zinc actually stays in that system, right? That's how you get sand on a beach is by, urchin shells and things like that, right? So it's an ingenious, way of actually solving it. And it's less about like, hey, we're going to come in and put our thing here. It's about really creating the environment for, and this is absolutely key. It goes back to what we've said about, we see the ocean as the hero in our story. The ocean has the amazing ability, the superpower really, to heal itself. The problem is that we keep getting in the way and keep messing it up. So in this case, it's about us saying, cool, let's smash all these urchins in the right place in a systematic way on the right types of reefs where we know once we smash them, we can keep them out of there. And the kelp, because it grows at the fastest rate of anything, you can actually restore, a 30, 40-foot tall kelp forest within 100 days. That's amazing in terms of a restoration tool, right? That's us growing mangrove forests, before you have a forest that's, taller than a person, that's like 8 to 10 years. You can get a kelp forest back within 6 months. You know what I mean? Like that is incredible. And all we have to do is get the system back in balance, create the environment for the ocean to heal itself, and do it in a systematic, measurable, tangible way, right? And that's what we're doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, if I understand this correct, like I see every year what you're explaining. The kelp forest, if I tell me if I'm wrong, I believe when the water hits like 70 degrees, the kelp starts to break apart. So back to what you explained before about the blob, if the ocean temperature just gets to a certain point, it's just going to decimate all of the kelp.
Just like the coral reefs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, right. So that's and us helping to put these areas back. Part of the problem right now is that there is no continuous kelp highway, which is actually one of the reasons why you'll never have otters come back in any meaningful way. If all of the kelp forests that are left are just little fragments and are separated, right? There's no way to really go from one to the other. So if we can put these back, even if another marine heat wave and whatever else comes, we've actually built back a resilient system that can fend off that challenge or that stressor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really simple. It's something that isn't relying on super fancy technology. And if I can, for a moment, just sort of shift from the Palos Verde project, right, where we're working directly with our partners at the Bay Foundation. They're working directly with the urchin fishermen that they're paying to do this work, to clear it, to keep it cleared, to monitor it, go back and hit like any hot spots. And that's great, right? What we're doing with Reef Check California in Monterey Bay is something that I've always wanted to do. Exact same type of mode, which is culling urchins. But in this case, we're trying to create a project where individuals can come and actually be a part of this work. It's a citizen science project is what we're actually building there, right? So in this case, and that's why we're partnering with Reef Check California, which is an amazing nonprofit group that is using volunteer divers to monitor the health of these ecosystems. And we're making this project and blocking it out at Tankers Reef, and we're asking volunteer divers, so people who are going there diving in the same way that I might go surfing or I might go paddleboarding, and instead of just going down there and looking for fish and whatever, we're saying, great, here's the area where bring a rock hammer with you,
smash,
go through the training, and then so it's like it's basically crowdsourcing the solution and the labor for that, all for a shared good, right? And that is so in Tankers Reef, there used to be a huge, amazing kelp forest there. Probably 20 acres, and it's all gone. We're trying to bring back about 7 or maybe 8 acres of the area that we think that we can do, and it comes down to smashing urchins, keeping them clear, doing it at the right time, so that the kelp can actually regenerate. So when the spores come and land on the bottom, they can grow and not be eaten immediately, right? So that's
I love how you explain that, because I think if people just heard, oh, they're going to go smash these sea urchins, they're not going to understand why. And the bigger picture that I love that you talked about is this word balance, and also just leaving the ocean alone. That's why I love the fact that we have a no-take zone right here. It's controversial. A lot of people don't like it. They want to be able to hop on a board with a fishing line and catch a fish, but they can't. But there's just something to me about the power of leaving the ocean alone to heal itself.
We need wilderness, man. Like MPAs are certainly in California are a very controversial thing, and most of the time it's seen through the lens of like fishing, right? But MPAs, they can be focused on all kinds of different things, and they have different MPAs have different things that you sort of can and can't do. But think about the things that the MPA also does or does that isn't even fishing related, in terms of like mining and drilling and sand extraction and all this kind of stuff, right? We need wild areas, not just for like, oh, it's great, it's a wild area and we like to be in there. These are the respite zones where nature actually has a chance to come and heal. And in terms of the kelp forest, there's a direct correlation there. It's like when we go and clear the sea urchins, we're not there with a bucket full of kelp spores, right? We're relying on the small patches of healthy kelp forest that are left to be the seed bank that is actually going to restore this, right? That's the same thing that comes from fishing, or a place where you can't take the lobster, or whatever else, right? It's like we need these areas because let's face it, humans have had such a dramatic impact on all of these ecosystems that we've broken them, right? So at least for a while, we're going to need zones that are the places where the regeneration can happen. It's literally like, think about it on the investment side of things, right? you never want to you never want to dig into your capital, right? It's like if you have a foundation, right? You want to have $1 million foundation. You never want to eat into the $1 million because it's actually generating the other revenue that you use to do the work. It's the seed bank. It's the financial bank, right? Okay. That's how this should actually be looked at. And yes, having them be in the right place and the right size, and having all the stakeholders have a voice in it is absolutely key. We completely agree with that. But we have to recognize that we've broken it, right? We've broken the system, and it's up to us to put it back. And if we actually do it in the right way, we won't need marine protected areas because the whole place will be back to what it was, right?
Amen to that. So, Michael, first of all, we'll share links to everything that you talked about today so people can find out more about everything that you've talked about. Just a couple more questions that I have, and I appreciate you spending all this time with us today. I want to bring up Billie Eilish. We use oh my God, we use Ocean Eyes as our theme song, if you will, for the podcast. I think
can we get that? I mean, that is literally like one of my most favorite songs, or if when I'm driving to one of my favorite places to surf out in West Marin to Bolinas to visit my buddy Ari or John Borg. It's that's just the mood that it's when I'm really driving to go surfing and have a good time and just chill out. That is my sort of go-to thing on Spotify.
There you go. Yeah. There's a lot of good remixes of it too, right?
Totally, yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So my last question:
we should get her out surfing, or her to the beach, or take her to the kelp forest and show her what's going on.
I think she would dig it, actually.
With her own eyes, right?
Let's make that happen. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. So my last question: speaking of ideas, give me the big vision. What's the big, money was no issue, if you couldn't fail kind of thing? What's the real big vision for SeaTrees?
Yeah, the real big vision is basically this, right? We have the next 10 years to get this ship steered in the right direction before the world passes the tipping point on climate that we're not going to be able to come back from. It's like when the kelp forest disappeared, right? Everything was good until it wasn't. It reached a tipping point. That's what we're headed towards. And the change, when it comes, is going to be that dramatic, right? It's going to be like, oh, we just lost everything within a scope of 10 years, right? That's what we're trying to avoid here. So our role in that, right, is basically this. Again, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So industry and businesses and nations and whatever else, they have to create the kind of policies let's look at companies like General Motors and Ford that have basically said, cool, we're only going to be making electric vehicles, by 2035, right? That is exactly the kind of thing, the signal to the markets that we need to actually see. There's other cool small companies like Fisker, which is this rad car company, which is actually based right in Manhattan Beach. They've already been doing that. They only make super rad electric cars that can get people to the beach without killing it, right? Those are the kinds of signals, which also sends signals to, okay, well, then we need the infrastructure for everyone who's going to be driving these things to plug these things in at work, at home. It is going to rapidly change what transportation even looks like. And what that does, right, is that's actually in a dramatic way reducing the amount of carbon that's being burned from fossil fuels to get everyone around. Transportation is one of the biggest footprints of any person or company or country on the planet. That is one of those things, right? So all of those types of things need to happen so that we stop putting carbon up into the air. But if I click my fingers right now, all the things that power our lives was done with zero carbon energy. We haven't solved climate change because of the carbon debt that we've already put up into the air. So at the exact same time, we need to be pulling that down. And the way to do that at scale is through the most amazing invention ever created, which is plants. And, it's really in the same way that we did for the kelp forest. We're essentially doing the same thing with the mangrove forest. We're helping to repair them, to get them back so that they can then use that energy that we've catalyzed there to heal themselves, to do all the things that they do, including sequestering all this carbon long-term back into the soil. So if we're not putting as much up and we're drawing it down, that is the solution for the planet. That's how we get out of this, out of this terrible choice. And we can do that, and we can solve that within 10, 15, 20 years. Like that's, it's not a science problem. It's a human problem, right? So there you go.
And lastly, then, what do you need to make it happen? How can we support you? What is it going to take?
So for our part, what SeaTrees has as its plan for the next 10 years is we need to have at least 100 new blue carbon ecosystem projects up on our SeaTrees platform around the world in 5 or 6 different types of ecosystems, right? That's what our North Star is. In the first year, we've gotten 6 projects up. That's pretty amazing. And that's been with,
tough time.
Bootstrapping and, not a lot of money, but sort of spit and duct tape and some really great, brand partners from across every single industry. You take like a surfboard company like Firewire and Slater Designs. They've committed to wiping out their entire carbon footprint of all their operations, including the carbon footprint of every single board that they actually make, right? So you have leaders in the surfing world on that side of it. You have our partners and friends at 4Ocean. They make the cool bracelet, right, from recycled content. Every time you buy one, they pull a pound of plastic out of the ocean, right? They've committed to being one of our ocean positive, climate neutral verified plus brands, right? Companies, rad apparel companies like Pangaea, companies like WeTransfer in the digital side of things. Our bank that we actually use, which is Bank of the West, which is probably the most climate friendly banking option available anywhere, right? It's harnessing what we've been able to do in the last couple of years with brand partners like that, and then just scaling it up, right? So that's where SeaTrees is working as a platform on mobile, where we actually make it a turnkey. It's like a product, right? So you can come in and you can wipe out your carbon footprint. You can plant trees. You can restore kelp. You can do coral reefs. And you don't have to talk to me. You can do it on your phone. And everything is then tracked. We have the funds that we need to keep working with our partners and finding new projects. And we show you where that money went, and we make it super tangible and traceable and transparent. And everyone can see what's going on, which is exactly what we want to do, because that's, driving back to the beginning of our conversation. It's like, how do you get people to love something and to be passionate about it? You need to tell them great stories about what's happening. That's how humans work, right? That's how we as a species get engaged in how we work and pass knowledge along and pass, love and passion on. So, that's where we're at. And actually, podcasts or things like this, conversations like this, right? That can be interesting. Be like, I didn't know about the Kelp Highway. I didn't know about a sustainable surfboard. I didn't know purple sea urchins were this gigantic problem. I didn't know that, most of the kelp forests in California are fucking gone. Yeah. It's like, okay, yeah, and there's a rad solution, and you can be a part. So go find SeaTrees on your phone, and plant your first 10 trees with us. It's $1 a tree. Take $10. Restore some kelp, right? Do coral reefs. Get involved. right?
Get involved. It's a beautiful thing. So I'm hearing three things. Individuals, like you just said, can donate, knowing that their money is going to
Yep.
go to a specific good. 100
Yep.
projects, meaning you need 100 places around the world and people there to help set up these projects, and then 100 partners or however many partners it would take to fund these projects.
Thousands of partners,
Yeah.
across every single industry, right? I've had people say, "Oh, cool, so SeaTrees is for the surfing industry." You're like, "No, no, it's for every industry in the world, right?" So if you're a shoe company, right, and you sell your shoes online or in the store, every time someone buys a pair of shoes, like our friends at CV's based in Santa Barbara, it's like every time they sell one of their Sea Change model shoes, it restores 1 square foot of California kelp forest, right? Take that, and we transfer. It's the exact same thing. It's like, what if we coupled, this economic engine that we have online and through our mobile devices, and one that everyone has shifted to buying things now, right? If we made that, what if this was one of the most powerful toolkits in your pocket for directly supporting ocean conservation?
Yeah.
And you do it on your own or the products that you buy. If all these companies that are selling things online added an environmental benefit that focused on blue carbon, we wouldn't be talking about, oh, great, we brought in $1 million in revenue in this last year, which we've been able to put towards these projects. We'd be talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars to do this.
Well, the good news is it's happening. And Michael, you're a champion for this cause. I love this conversation because the reason I created this podcast was to create a platform for people exactly like you that are out there doing the work for the ocean that we love so much, for the planet that we love so much, and for humankind. So it really affects everything. So I completely appreciate your time. And definitely we'll talk offline to see how I can better support you, how we can support what you're doing to build up this army of partnerships to make this thing happen, because you deserve to have it. You deserve to have it happen because of your heart and passion, and more importantly, as you would agree, the planet needs it to happen. So let's see what.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. You are awesome, and
well, thank you for all the work that you do. And if I can actually just leave you with sort of one thought here, right? So there's this great quote that we use from a Japanese poet, Ryunosuke Satoru. I'm sure I absolutely butchered that, but he's got this great quote. It says, "Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean," right? And that's at the heart of what we actually have to do. We're a drop, you're a drop, millions and billions of other drops around there. Collectively, we have the power to do what needs to be done. And, again, it's not a science problem, it's a human problem, and we can do it.
Let's do it. Michael,
Let's do it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's our show, everybody. We'll see you next time. We'll send you all the links, and you can contribute and support this amazing mission. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. Stay out in the water.